On this Tuesday night, Canada's growing hunger, the record-breaking demand for food banks.
We are at a breaking point.
The solutions aid agencies are calling for. Ordered back to work.
Canada's economy is taking a hit.
The government imposes binding arbitration for locked-out dock workers when Canada's busiest ports could reopen. New details about an alleged terrorist plot. What court documents say 2 Ottawa teens were planning. Plus, preserving history.
So the red are the destroyed buildings. There's whole areas that have been completely erased.
The project in Halifax that offers lessons for other cities.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Jeff Semple.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. The number of Canadians who can no longer afford to feed their families is skyrocketing. That stark warning comes from 2 of Canada's biggest food banks, which released new numbers today revealing demand has hit another record high. Food banks in Toronto alone served 3.5 million customers in the past year. That's 1 million more than the previous year and nearly 4 times as many as the food banks saw before the pandemic. Eric Sorensen reports on what's driving the demand and desperation.
It is basic food to put on the table, and more Canadians need this help than ever before. More than 150,000 turned to Toronto food banks for the first time this year. Inflation has sent food prices soaring, and the housing crisis has made basic rent so expensive, almost nothing is left to feed many families.
The average food bank user, once you subtract rent and utilities, has just over $7 a day for all other expenses. That's food, medication, clothing, education, everything.
The Daily Bread Food Bank annual Who's Hungry report says there were 3.5 million client visits to Toronto's food banks, 1 million more than last year at this time. In Toronto, more than 1 in 10 are relying on food banks, a 36% increase just in the last year. It's the cost of living that is bringing them here, and the frustration is that the changes that are needed aren't happening. Governments at all levels are falling short, say Toronto's food banks. Municipal governments have not reduced poverty as planned. The province is not addressing the housing crisis, and Ottawa must do more with disability benefits.
We are at a breaking point as the government relies on our mutual aid, charity, and food bank agencies to solve this problem. There is one very real solution, and that is to invest in affordable housing.
Let's make government step up and introduce laws that will decrease precarious employment and provide stable, decent incomes to the Canadians that require it.
Food banks say they are not the solution. They are the face of societal failure to deal with hunger, unemployment, and lack of housing.
It's only together are we going to make people notice what is happening in our community, and only together are we going to be able to sound the alarm loud enough so that it drives the type of change that we're talking about.
While inflation is falling, the price of food is still rising at a rate above inflation. Food banks want Canadians to contribute to help meet the needs of hungry families, but they also want them to get on their politicians to do more to eliminate the need. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
The federal government is now stepping in to end labour conflicts at Canada's 3 busiest ports. Workers are on the picket lines in Vancouver, Montreal and Quebec City, locked out by their employers. The labour action is impeding the flow of more than $1.2 billion worth of goods every day. Canada's Labour Minister says that cost to Canadians is too high, and he's now ordering binding arbitration. Mike Armstrong reports.
The 3 lockouts at 3 different Canadian ports, according to the federal Labour Minister, have one major thing in common. There's no sign of a solution on the horizon. Faced with what he calls an alarming lack of urgency to find deals in each conflict, Minister Steve MacKinnon says deals will be imposed.
Canadians have limited tolerance right now for economic self-harm.
About $1.3 billion worth of goods flow through the 3 ports each day. Stopping that, MacKinnon says, is costing the country too much. Using a section in the Canadian Labour Code, he's sending the 3 conflicts to the Canadian Industrial Relations Board. The board has the power to order operations resume and impose binding arbitration. Ottawa ended the shutdown at Canada's 2 biggest railway companies last summer the same way. It says a negotiated settlement would have been better, but wasn't coming.
In these circumstances and in the prior circumstances, there was no perspective, no possibility, realistically, of that occurring.
Well, certainly there's some sense of relief after a lot of anxiety.
Ottawa's move is good news, according to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. The conflicts at the ports, it says, are already affecting supply chains. The longer they went on, the worse it would get.
We have to recognize what these kinds of disputes do to our international reputation as a stable trading partner.
Now, the board sets its own timetable. The process should take a few days. But using the board has its critics who say it undermines the bargaining process. It's also different from legislating a group back to work, where there's an open debate in Parliament.
When you use this form of imposing binding arbitration unilaterally, you don't have to do that. And so it's highly undemocratic.
There will be a debate about this.
Well, the minister says he understood there would be critics of the move, but that he had to act. He couldn't sit back and watch the economy, as he puts it, self-destruct. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
And there's more looming job action at Canada Post ahead of the busy holiday season. Canada Post says employees will be locked out Friday if no negotiated deal is reached. Earlier today, the union representing postal workers gave 72-hour strike notice, but the union says any job action will depend on talks in the coming days. Sticking points include salary hikes and better health coverage. Canada Post says it's operating as normal, but there may be some delays. Turning to breaking news now, former British Columbia Premier John Horgan has died after his third cancer diagnosis. He was 65. Horgan was appointed Canada's ambassador to Germany last year, but then went on leave after his latest diagnosis. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau paid tribute, saying John embodied kindness and courage. He was a fighter. Neetu Garcha reports on how Horgan is being remembered.
Hello.
John Horgan dedicated his life to public service.
What's it called, Super Tomato Man?
Born and raised in Victoria, he became leader of the BC NDP in 2014 and premier in 2017. The 65-year-old died at the BC Cancer Centre in Victoria. In 2008, he was diagnosed with bladder cancer. In 2021, he was diagnosed with throat cancer. Then in June, he was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. At the time, he was living in Berlin, serving as Canada's ambassador to Germany. He returned to BC for end-of-life care. BC Premier David Eby referred to him as a mentor.
In terms of law, he was the premier who brought in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. He was accessible, he was fun and funny.
Federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh said he was an incredible leader and a dear friend, a pillar of our movement who made life better for working people. In a statement, his family noting the well-being of British Columbia and everyone in it was everything to him. Outside of politics, Horgan was known for his love of sports. A former rugby player who also loved lacrosse, always seen at games for Victoria's team, the Shamrocks.
One of my only regrets is that I never got to play for the Shamrocks. And I met my wife in Peterborough because of the Shamrocks.
His deep love for his wife Ellie was well known. He prioritized time with her and their two sons, Nate and Evan.
I did not intend to stop. Cancer is a can I say that? Can you bleep me on that?
A history buff whose appreciation for the province's heritage ran deep. John Horgan leaves behind a legacy of integrity, dedication, and service.
A BC teenager is in critical condition after testing positive for avian flu. The province's top doctor says testing and contact tracing is now underway.
And we would have tested a number in the vicinity of 36 people for influenza to make sure that there's no hidden or asymptomatic or mild infections out there.
It's the first known case of bird-to-human transmission of the disease in Canada. The symptoms are similar to the seasonal flu, including a cough, fever, headache, and muscle pain. Global News has learned new details about an alleged terror plot targeting members of Canada's Jewish community. Court documents allege 2 Ottawa teenagers planned to bomb a pro-Israel rally on Parliament Hill last year. The teens were arrested in December and February. Mercedes Stephenson reports.
Federal court documents reveal that 2 Ottawa teens charged with ISIS-related terrorism offences were planning to place a bomb here on Parliament Hill. The Canadian government says the teen boys were looking at targeting a pro-Israel rally like this one. Their goal? To kill as many Jews as possible, according to multiple national security sources. The plot was in its advanced stages when the RCMP counterterrorism unit made their arrests. Court documents obtained by Global News confirm one of the boys was in possession of TATP, a homemade explosive, as well as ball bearings.
By the time they get to a place where they have the components, that really means that they're basically ready to go.
TATP has been used in major ISIS terror attacks around the globe. The teens' alleged ISIS radicalization was already underway last summer, according to sources, but national security documents obtained by Global News state that the October 2023 Hamas attack on Israel possibly accelerated the plot. The document also reveals that at least one of the boys was reportedly in contact with someone overseas in ISIS, which the government refers to as Daesh, and that contact occurred during the time the group called for violence in response to the conflict. The threat is not a surprise, but certainly a concern for the Jewish community, and it's taking a toll.
The level of anxiety in the community is significant.
Fogel says the community has received dozens of serious warnings from police. National security sources tell Global News that arrests related to violent extremism and terrorism in Canada have increased by around 500% since Hamas attacked Israel 13 months ago. Jeff?
Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa. Thanks, Mercedes. Some frightening moments for passengers on board 3 separate flights over Haiti. The flights with American Airlines, JetBlue Airlines, and Spirit Airlines were all hit by bullets on Monday as they attempted to depart or land in Haiti. One flight attendant was injured. Street gangs in the capital, Port-au-Prince, have reportedly been shooting at aircraft. American aviation officials have now barred U.S. airlines from flying to Haiti for the next 30 days. The latest round of Israeli airstrikes in Gaza has killed at least 31 people. According to local medics, 11 of those victims were at a makeshift cafeteria in an Israeli-designated humanitarian zone. This father is mourning the death of his 2 children killed in a separate Israeli strike, which hit close to a UN clinic in central Gaza. According to the UN's Human Rights Agency, nearly 70% of the known victims in Gaza have been women and children. Israel rejects those figures. Meanwhile, nearly 30 trucks carrying desperately needed food, water, and medicine traveled into northern Gaza on Monday. The United States had given Israel 1 month to increase aid to 350 trucks per day, or the White House said it would reduce American military support to Israel. That deadline is set to expire this week, and human rights groups say Israel has failed to meet those obligations. However, the White House said today it will not change its policy on arms transfers, noting Israel has taken steps to increase the flow of aid into Gaza. The president-elect is assembling his team. Coming up, why Donald Trump's new inner circle doesn't seem to think much of Canada. Breaking news from the U.S., where Donald Trump has just named billionaire Elon Musk to lead a new group called the Department of Government Efficiency. The organization will operate outside the government itself and will also be led by Trump's former primary rival, Vivek Ramaswamy. Trump returns to the Oval Office in January and has been busy building his team. As Jackson Prosco explains, the selections so far are providing a preview of what Canada-U.S. relations might look like for the next 4 years.
When Donald Trump returns to the White House, he'll be surrounded by advisors and cabinet secretaries who've sometimes taken a dim view of Canada.
I'm not talking about Communist China's social credit system. I'm talking about Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister.
That's Kristi Noem, governor of South Dakota, likely to be the next Secretary of Homeland Security. There's Mike Waltz, Trump's pick for National Security Advisor, an aggressive critic of Canadian defense spending and of the Prime Minister. On social media, he has lauded Pierre Poilievre as, quote, the guy who is going to send Trudeau packing, calling Canada a progressive mess. Florida Senator Marco Rubio, expected to become Secretary of State, has openly attacked Canada's policy toward refugees from Gaza, suggesting it's a pathway for terrorists to enter the U.S.
You know, I've always had a good relationship with Justin.
And then there's Trump himself, who has promised sweeping tariffs on imports from Canada and every other nation.
These are folks whose CVs and past experience really match the job.
Behind the scenes, Canada has long worked to get ready for a Trump return, as Canada's ambassador explained on the eve of the election.
We know the Trump team. We know President Trump.
We know the people around him.
Ottawa is offering a brave face, suggesting the two countries still have plenty of shared interests, like standing up to China.
Canada is aligned with the United States already, and we're going to be able to do good things together.
That's not to say there won't be tension. Defense spending remains a major sore spot. Others will surely arise.
Canadian government needs to understand that you can wear a MAGA hat and also be in favor of productive relations with Canada.
In a second Trump term, Canadian officials know what to expect, even if that means bracing for the unexpected. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
A New York judge has postponed a decision on whether to undo Donald Trump's conviction in his hush money case. The judge was scheduled to rule today, but he's now delayed the verdict until November 19th. A jury convicted Trump earlier this year of falsifying business records related to a hush money payment to adult film star Stormy Daniels. But in July, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that presidents have broad immunity from criminal prosecution. The president-elect denies any wrongdoing, and Trump's lawyers now want the case dismissed. Abuse scandal. Up next, why the head of the Anglican Church is resigning. The head of the Anglican Church is stepping down over accusations he failed to act on reports of a serial child abuser within the church. Redmond Shannon reports from London, and a warning, some of these details are disturbing.
The Almighty Trinity, the
Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, led the services for the funeral of Queen Elizabeth and for the coronation of King Charles. But his 11 years as head of the Church of England are now over. He has resigned just days after a report detailed how the Anglican Church dealt with the case of the late John Smythe, a Canadian-born lay preacher and lawyer who was accused of brutally beating more than 100 boys and young men in the UK, Zimbabwe and South Africa. The report described the beatings as sexually motivated.
He introduced sadistic beatings when I was an older teenager and through my university days.
The report said when Welby became Archbishop of Canterbury, he was informed of the abuse but failed to inform police, and that Smythe could have been brought to justice before he died in 2018. This is Welby speaking last week.
At that time, I asked the necessary questions, which was I did right, which was to say, have the police been informed, have social services been informed? I was told they had. And no, I'm not going to resign for this.
Since then, victims and some senior clergy called on Welby to step down. A petition had 13,000 signatures. On Tuesday, Welby's resignation statement said, "It is very clear that I must take personal and institutional responsibility." He said he hopes his decision makes clear how seriously the Church of England understands the need for change.
A lot of people in the Anglican Church in Canada will be asking a lot of questions because they are aware, and I think a lot of Canadians outside of the church will be asking questions too.
British Canadian Anglican priest Michael Corrin believes appointing the right female bishop as replacement could help mark a fresh start. A commission within the Church of England will put forward 2 potential replacement candidates to the British Prime Minister. He will then advise King Charles, who will need to approve the new Archbishop of Canterbury to take up residence here at Lambeth Palace. Jeff?
Redmond Shannon in London. Thanks, Red. Canada Soccer has parted ways with Bev Priestman, the head coach of the national women's soccer team, after that Olympic drone scandal. Priestman and 2 other team officials were banned from any soccer-related activity for 1 year by FIFA after New Zealand complained Canadian staff flew drones over their training sessions in Paris. Canada Soccer said Priestman and the 2 other officials would not return, and a search for a new head coach will commence shortly. Halifax history. Up next, taking stock of centuries-old architecture. Canadian singer Joni Mitchell famously sang about paving paradise to put up a parking lot. Well, those lyrics ring true in many Canadian cities, where urban expansion has often meant paving over the past. Now, a project in Halifax is measuring exactly how many historic buildings have been lost. Heidi Petracek reports.
Nova Scotia's capital is bursting at the seams, cranes and construction everywhere, which got a team at St. Mary's University thinking.
We were interested in measuring how many old buildings Halifax has. And it was funny. When we started, we realized that there was no count. Nobody had ever really counted.
So students took an 1878 city map and cross-referenced it with current data to see how many buildings from way back then survived.
And long story short, we discovered most of them have gone. 87% are gone.
They turned their findings into an interactive online map called Halifax Memory Maps.
So the red are the destroyed buildings, and there's whole areas that have been completely erased.
This big box store, once the site of an army hospital. This park, home to a palatial private residence torn down long ago.
It's cool to kind of make those connections from the past and place it in the present.
The 1917 Halifax explosion did some of the damage, but most of it is simply the price of progress as cities scramble to build housing.
We should kind of understand what we have and what should be preserved and know the stories before they're lost.
Halifax's newly minted mayor, a former city planner, agrees.
People don't come here to go to the mall. They come here to walk on the historic waterfront or walk on Barrington Street or go see the Titanic graveyard and those kind of things.
The good news, there's still plenty of character left here, like this building from 1835, now a pub. But out of the more than 1,000 historic structures still standing, only 381 are protected heritage properties. For Fowler, that means pressing pause before demolition.
Look at this inheritance of architecture and decide which are the things that we value. That's a conversation.
One he thinks all cities should have. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Halifax.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday night. I'm Jeff Semple. Tonight's Your Canada is Livingston Cove in Nova Scotia. Thanks for watching. Donna will be back with you tomorrow. Have a great night.